Today, we will explore the core of Immanuel Kant's deontological ethics by applying his three formulations of the categorical imperative to a complex and personal moral scenario, adultery. Our goal is to move beyond subjective feelings or consequences and evaluate the act itself through the lens of pure reason, determining whether it can ever be morally permissible according to Kant's framework. The moral scenario in Kantian framework. The scenario we will evaluate is one of adultery within a marriage. To analyze it, we will use the three central formulations of Kant's categorical imperative, as outlined in his groundwork of the metaphysics of morals. Before we apply them, it is important to understand a key term, maxim. A maxim is the subjective principle behind your action. It is the rule you give yourself when you decide to do something. For example, I will lie to get what I want is a maxim. In Kant's framework, the moral worth of an action depends entirely on whether its maxim can hold up to these three tests. The first deals with universalizability, the second with the intrinsic value of rational beings, and the third with the ideal of a moral community. We will now apply each one to our chosen act. Applying the first formulation, let's begin with the first formulation. The adulterer's maxim is: when I desire a secret romantic relationship outside my marriage, I will deceive my spouse to pursue it. Now, we must universalize this maxim. Imagine a world where everyone in a marriage acts on this same rule. In such a world, no one would trust their partner. The very concept of a marriage, which is a consensual union built on promises of fidelity, would become meaningless because those promises would be systematically broken. As philosopher Alan Wood explains, a maxim fails this test if its universalization would make it impossible to achieve the purpose you intend. The adulterer intends to have both the security of marriage and the excitement of an affair, but if everyone did this, the security of marriage would vanish because no one could trust anyone. You would be willing a world with marriage and a world where marriage is impossible, a logic contradiction. Therefore, the maxim fails the test. It cannot be consistently willed as a universal law. And this is what we have in this slide. In the next slide, we are applying the second formulation, humanity as an end. And in this formulation, it requires us to treat all rational beings, including ourselves, always as ends in themselves and never merely as a means. Kant argues that humanity has dignity, not just price. It is something that should never be traded away for personal satisfaction. How does adultery fare? The adulterer uses their spouse as a means to maintain domestic stability and social standing, while denying them the truth needed to make their own rational choices about the relationship. The spouse is manipulated, their agency is compromised, and they are treated as an object to be managed rather than a partner to be respected. Furthermore, the third party is also often used merely as a means to the adulterer's gratification without the full respect and commitment of a genuine partnership. By prioritizing personal desire over the rational agency of others, adultery fundamentally fails to honor the humanity in persons. Now, we are going to apply the third formulation, and we arrive at the third formulation, the kingdom of ends. This is the most comprehensive of the three, and to understand it fully, we need to see how it differs from the first. The first formulation asked, is this maxim logically consistent when universalized? The third formulation asks something deeper. Could this maxim serve as a law in an ideal community of rational beings who all respect each other as equals? Kant describes this kingdom as a place where everyone is both a lawmaker and a subject. We create the rules and we must also live by them. So let's run through an experiment. Imagine we are all citizens in this kingdom of ants, and we are gathered together to vote whether whether the maxim it is permissible to deceive your spouse for personal gratification should become a universal law for our community. Let's consider how different rational beings would vote. First, consider the faithful spouse. This person values trust and honesty. They would immediately reject this law because it would destroy the security and intimacy they cherish. They would vote no. Second, considering someone who might be tempted to have an affair, the potential adulterer themselves. Even they would have to vote no. Why? Because if they vote yes, they are giving everyone else in the community, including their own spouse, permission to deceive them. No rational being can consent to a law that would allow others to harm or deceive them. As Kant says, we cannot will a law that undermines our own humanity. Third, consider a consistent moral agent who understands that laws must apply equally to all. They would see that this rule is not a genuine law at all. It is just a self-serving exception. It privileges the desires of the deceiver over the rights of the deceived. It cannot be harmonized with the mutual respect that defines the kingdom of ends. So, the vote is unanimous no. The maxim fails because it cannot secure the universal consent of all rational beings. It is a private divisive rule, not a shared law for a community of equals. This is why the kingdom of ends is the ultimate test. It asks whether our actions could exist in a world where everyone is treated with dignity and everyone has a voice in making the rules. In the last slide, we have a real-world example, the community council. To make this even more concrete, let's look at a real-world analogy. Imagine a neighborhood community council drafting a good neighbor agreement. A set of rules everyone agrees to follow. One member stands up and proposes an amendment. Residents may make promises to their neighbors and break them if keeping the promise becomes personally inconvenient. Would anyone vote for this? Of course not. It would destroy the very fabric of the community. No one could trust anyone else. This is exactly what the maxim of adultery does within the kingdom of ends. It proposes a rule that would fracture trust and make genuine community impossible, just as the neighborhood council would unanimously reject that amendment. The rational beings in the kingdom of ends unanimously reject the maxim of deception. And in the last slide, we have the conclusions and the synthesis. In conclusion, when evaluated through Kant's deontological framework, adultery is unequivocally morally impermissible. It fails each formulation of the categorical imperative. It cannot be universalized without logical contradiction. It treats persons as mere means rather than ends in themselves. And finally, as we've seen in depth with the kingdom of ends, it cannot be harmonized into a community of rational lawmakers who must all consent to the rules that bind them. This analysis highlights the strength of Kantian ethics. It provides a consistent, reason-based test for morality that doesn't rely on predicting consequences, but instead on the intrinsic rightness or wrongness of our maxims. It shows that for Kant, morality demands we act in a way that respects the rational agency of everyone always. And finally, we have the references. These are the key sources that inform this presentation, from Kant's original text to contemporary scholarly interpretations. I highly recommend Wood's Kantian Ethics for anyone wanting a deeper understanding of the Kingdom of Ends formulation. Thank you for your time. I welcome your questions and feedback.